Our next presentation is going to be on migrant worker vaccine rollout and travel restrictions. And so I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Shannon Tucker. Shannon is the labor strategy lead for the Ministry of Agriculture. And Shannon is fortunate to have a passionate team of dedicated professionals to deliver on the following objectives: planning and developing an integrated and comprehensive labor strategy and action plan focused on agricultural labor supply, demand, source, training, accommodations, etc., focused on farm labor, which currently uses temporary foreign workers, ministry oversight, coordination, and direction regarding all labor initiatives related to temporary foreign workers and domestic seasonal farm workers, implementation of the 14-day isolation program for incoming temporary foreign workers to British Columbia. So I'd like to hand it over to you, Sharon, and we're looking forward to your updates.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Sabrina, for the introduction. And as Sabrina mentioned, I'm Shannon Tucker. I'm the labor project lead for the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries. And I just wanted to walk you through the program that we've established to support our temporary foreign workers, which are a critical and essential component of our food chain supply. And we're very, very grateful for the contributions that they make. So BC has a different model than almost every province in Canada. PEI has a similar model to British Columbia's, although it's not as extensive just given the size of the population there. We, of course, have a required 14-day quarantine period that corresponds with the Federal Quarantine Act. And so what we do is we have provincially managed and funded accommodations, which are hotels prominently in the Richmond area, so about 10 to 15 minutes away from the Vancouver airport, where we offer accommodations, food, laundry, security services, and a few other essential services for our agricultural temporary foreign workers. 14 days, staying in a hotel room in a foreign country, it can be fairly daunting, and we try to ensure that we have adequate supports to take as good of care of everybody as we can, including the staff that administer these services. It can be a little bit intense at times. And so recognizing that point, we've partnered with a few different agencies to make sure that we can run everything in the program smoothly and efficiently and optimize our communications across medical teams, airport staff, the consulates, as well as the workers. So the way that we've orchestrated the program is that we work really closely with Life Labs. So Life Labs is contracted by the Vancouver airport to conduct COVID testing on day 1 and day 8. We have on-site medical teams that screen the workers for symptoms on day 2 and day 12. So we're having a little bit of staggered response there to ensure a few different checkpoints. We have wellness check calls from the Ministry of Citizen Services on day 3 and day 8. And we've worked in just some logistics around that so that workers know that when the phone rings to please answer it, and they can press 0 if they're not quite sure. We also have translation and interpretation services to make sure that obviously that we can communicate with everybody. We've had the really good fortune of working with a non-government organization, Success, which has been instrumental to the health and mental well-being of our workers. So Success takes groups of workers on wellness walks during the program. We try to aim for 3 times a week for individuals to get out for about an hour each time. Last I heard that Success, a lot of the folks that are doing the wellness walks, they're walking about 20 to 25 kilometers a day. So it's inspiring for me to get going on my 10,000 step goal for myself. But it's an extensive amount of work and dedication, and we're really grateful for their contributions to the program. We also in the ministry have delegated authority from the Ministry of Health to conduct inspections. So the way the program works is that while we're taking care of workers in quarantine, we have a team of inspectors that in the meantime are going out to the farms where the workers are destined to live during their employment. And we are ensuring that the accommodations are COVID compliant in terms of bed requirements, space requirements. There's a whole bunch of different agencies that conduct different inspections. So for example, WorkSafe has always been in the mix and continues to take care of their part of that. But we have delegated authority to just ensure the COVID specific parts of the accommodation compliance. So we basically, an accommodation needs to make sure that they're ready to receive workers If they're not, we insist that the farmers have adequate accommodations. Otherwise, the workers remain in quarantine at the employer's expense. So I'm sure, as you know, as all of you know, the pandemic, it sure changes quickly. And so these are a few of the sort of major federal government policy changes that threw us for a little bit of a loop. And I think we've done really well in responding. So just sort of coming back to January, which is where a lot of the changes started to take place. Effective January 7th was when the federal government required negative COVID tests within that 3-day window prior to boarding. Where that was tough for the temporary foreign workers, we found, is that because employers pay for the flights and because flights are expensive, usually it wouldn't be uncommon for a temporary foreign worker to have a bit of a milk run flight where you're having, 1 or 2 or even 3 layovers in various countries to get to Canada. The problem with that is that we found that due to the layovers, and because the flights were managed so tightly, if there's any type of delay or hiccup in that travel plan, the COVID test would expire because it would sort of be out of that 3-day window. So we had a few difficulties to navigate around that. And since then, things have been okay, but that was a bit of a stumbling block with that policy to begin with. Fast forward to February, all travelers coming into Canada are required to have the COVID test upon arrival into Canada. And again, on day 8, which used to be day 10. So again, really, really fortunate to have the partnership with Life Labs. And I'll get into that a little bit further as to how we sort of manage the information sharing and coordination to best support that change. And most recently, the commercial flight ban has been lifted. So for a while, effective January 1st, there was a federal sort of border closure on commercial flights to sunshine destinations, which heavily affected, obviously, the temporary foreign workers traveling here from Mexico and the Caribbean countries. So just recently, on May 1st, that ban was lifted. And so what that meant in the meantime, when commercial flights weren't flying, is that we had to change to charter flights. So there were a few considerations with charter flights. They're probably double the cost of a commercial flight. The flights have to be predominantly full. So if we're looking at a charter flight is typically 170 people, it's not worth it for the charter flight to operate if there are only 10 or 20 people coming. So we had to really work closely with the travel agency to ensure that everything was tightly coordinated and that we were optimizing flights as best we could to make sure that we were hitting certain numbers. We also offered to work with smaller provinces that perhaps couldn't get workers in for that exact reason. So back east, we're trying to work with some of our provincial counterparts there to say that if for example, they had temporary foreign workers, they could come to BC on a charter flight and then kind of hopscotch over there. So again, a little bit of coordination and partnership. So we were very fortunate to sort of get through all of those hiccups, but it's been a challenging ride. So as I was alluding to, the partnership at Life Labs has been critical for us. So we were informed about a week before this happened that we needed to kind of work together to make a process roll. So there, again, a little bit of obstacles with the FlyClear app. So there were some federal government tools or applications that once you got through a couple of steps, they were available in Spanish, but the primary steps were only available in English and French. So it was difficult for us because that meant that the accessibility for the temporary foreign workers was significantly reduced. So because the FlyClear app was posing a lot of problems for us, we decided to implement a different registration process just to alleviate those anxieties. What that ended up resulting in is that we requested a new PHO order through Dr. Bonnie Henry to basically act as an information sharing agreement to allow us to share information such as the temporary foreign worker names and their hotel information with Life Labs so that they could print requisitions in advance and be prepared to do the testing, the day 1 testing right on arrival at the airport. And then also be able to follow up with the in-room visits for day 8, which I'll get to right after this. The way our program works is that we have a dedicated physician. So Dr. Jonathan Mallow from the BC CDC has been critical in making all of this a smooth ride. He's a dedicated medical health officer for our program. And so all of the test results for day 1 and day 8, they go to him. And if there's any positives, then he works back through the medical team that's on site at all of the hotels. And then we work with the worker to ensure that They're getting the proper time and rest and food required to heal, and then keeping track of testing through that, to make sure that workers can be released as soon as possible, but definitely not before that. And of course, the on-site medical team, as I just mentioned, is notified of any positives for follow-up. So day 8 is a similar process, except rather than doing this at the airport, this has to be done at the hotel. So this is a fairly arduous process because we have several hotel sites. So we have one main contractor with 4 main hotel sites. But because the numbers have increased significantly, we're doing really well in the program this year. That means that we've had to kind of subcontract from the original contractor. So there are multiple hotel sites, generally within the vicinity of each other, but it still requires a lot of work and sort of hauling around medical equipment for the health folks. So Life Labs has a mobile team. It's a bit tricky because with the elevator restrictions during COVID, we were only allowed 2 people in an elevator. So this team would go kind of floor by floor and make sure that they were coordinating with their records as to who was staying where in the hotel, which floor were they on, and then sort of plan their route accordingly. So the testing process is explained to the workers during the wellness walks, just so they know what to expect. We also presented on this process to all of the consulates, so Mexican consulate, the Guatemalan consulate, and the Jamaican consulate, just so people were aware of what was happening and what workers could expect. So for example, all tests are done with the door open, the hotel door room open. We don't sort of want the closed door atmosphere, somebody being nervous, people coming into your room, maybe you're not exactly sure what's happening. So we had some really clear communications and standard operating procedures that we shared very, very broadly and very transparently, and invited feedback on those to make sure that everybody was comfortable with what to expect and with what was happening. And of course, we're very fortunate to have the on-site medical team again that was in the loop with anything that happened from the day 8 process and could follow up with any COVID positive tests. So we've been really, really fortunate that temporary foreign workers were prioritized through the Ministry of Health and sort of the health authorities that be for vaccinations. So effective March 17th, we were able to offer all temporary foreign workers the opportunity to be vaccinated. The model changed a little bit just because originally we tried to have the vaccines during the quarantine period. So that involved a lot of work for health in terms of them, again, accessing the elevators, trying to get to everybody, trying to coordinate everything within a few days. So we've typically hundreds of workers that come in just sort of with the flight batches, and it just became a little bit too much to do it in-house. So now what we've done is we've switched the model so that vaccines are offered once quarantine is over. So when workers are departing the hotel, we have 2 different modes of transportation. So you can either take a large charter bus that's arranged by a travel company, by the employer, or the employer comes to pick up the workers in a private vehicle. So once you're out of quarantine, you have the opportunity to go to a site that's near the Vancouver airport. It's not in the airport, because obviously we're trying to kind of keep track of contamination and keep everybody safe. But it's a really well done site. It's a very easy process. It's everybody's organized. The charter buses are prioritized because they are paid for by the hour. So we're trying to be mindful of employer costs. To date, we've had 3,657 doses that have been administered. We're also encountering a few challenges just around the conversations that have been happening around vaccine compatibility and brands. So what we'll find is that we'll have temporary foreign workers that will come from other countries and they'll be fully vaccinated. We're not quite sure sometimes which brand has been used to vaccinate. Some folks arrive partially vaccinated, and that's almost even trickier because then we have to kind of figure out what's compatible for the second dose, or if we should try to coordinate that in Canada. So we're kind of standing by to see what happens with the federal government in terms of what can be mixed and matched and when, and then what the federal stance will be in terms of accepting brands that were used in other countries that maybe aren't offered in Canada. So we're still working with, and to the last point, we're managing all of that very closely with the Ministry of Health and the regional health authorities to ensure that we have a comprehensive provincial approach, and that all of the records can be shared adequately to ensure that we're not missing any critical pieces of information with that. So the program is generally considered to be a great success. We have had really positive feedback from program partners and as well as the consulates. We had no COVID-related agriculture deaths in BC, which is a bit of a sad point to emphasize, but it's a critical point for us, and that's why we do the program. I know that Ontario really suffered with a few farm outbreaks that did result in fatalities, so we're really pleased that nothing like that has happened in British Columbia. We've reduced the potential for on-farm outbreaks because this model is prevention focused, whereas a lot of the other provinces are focusing on reaction. So once somebody has been diagnosed as COVID positive, then sort of funding and action is mobilized for the safe isolation response and all of the supports around that. But we've taken a bit of a different tack that I think has been very valuable. And of course, we've maintained a critical labor supply. BC food production wouldn't work without the contributions of temporary foreign workers. It's not a nice to have for us. They're a critical component of the agriculture workforce. And we were able to continue to have sort of the workforce supply come through because of the measures that were put in place, where I believe that Ontario wasn't as fortunate due to the outbreaks that were happening there. So just some quick statistics, and I know that all of you can read the table. Currently, we have 760 people in the provincial accommodations. The numbers are staggered a bit. So of course, depending on when people came in and when they're released after 2 weeks, or if they're COVID positive and need to stay longer, that's sort of how we have to take into account those statistics. To date, we've had just over 10,000 temporary foreign workers complete quarantine. So we anticipate that by the end of this year, we will be pretty much on par with 2019 numbers. So basically kind of getting back to our normal in terms of the temporary foreign worker contributions that we typically expect. We've had to date 139 COVID positive workers enter the quarantine program. So the quarantine program started on April 13th of 2020. And so I believe these stats are current as of June 14th. So this is as current as I could get them for this deck. So essentially that's 139 COVID cases that the program detected and managed that didn't go directly from the airport to a farm to the surrounding community, and then sort of posed a risk of transmission to everybody sort of in those circles. So we're really, really proud of that statistic. We do have 3 people right now that are currently COVID positive that are recovering in the program. And we've had 1,700 inspections of farms completed to date. So that number is interesting to me because it shows you that for 2021, so from January to June, there are 1,000 work sites in BC that have received temporary foreign workers, and every one of those sites had to pass our inspection to make sure that our workers were safe. So in general, really, really proud of the work that's been done with our small but mighty team, and curious as to how everything will shake out around the federal and provincial restart plans and what might kind of come from the Quarantine Act and any resulting policy changes. And I believe that's the end of the presentation. And just a picture that was submitted to us from one of the employers who really, really loves her crew, and they're a great team, and we're really happy to have everybody healthy and productive and here. So very grateful for the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shannon. I'm great to hear about all the work that you and your ministry have been doing during this. I can only imagine extremely busy time.
Yes, very much so. Thank you.
And so if you have any questions for Shannon, please feel free to pose those in the chat or utilize the raise hand function. And we do have one question that was sent to us. In regards to, are migrant workers being paid during the 14-day quarantine? If yes, who is paying and how would they be receiving that payment?
So they are being paid for during the 14-day quarantine. I believe they're paid for 30 hours a week, and that is through the federal government. So unfortunately, I don't know the nitty-gritties of it, but I can find more information and email that to you.
So with this incredible program and the close connection with thousands of workers, have you identified other needs other than the need of housing inspections?
Other needs, honestly, we've had some questions about the food in the program. We do our best to offer a range of menus depending on culture and dietary needs. So we have menus for like a Mexican cuisine, Asian, Jamaican, which is a bit more spice oriented. We try to have a vegetarian and diabetic option as well. But I still do hear comments about, maybe the food could have some more variety. Maybe there could be a bit more of a cultural leaning in the menu. And I get that 14 days is tough where, maybe you're kind of tired of the same breakfast or the same lunch. So the food has been flagged as maybe something for us to consider in terms of variety. Other than the need of housing inspections, generally, we do work with the consulate. There have been some employer behaviors identified, to be honest with you, around treatment and expectations. The Mexican consulate in particular, is very heavily involved. We've had some meetings with the Guatemalan consulate as well to sort of have a closer handle on them, because Guatemala is through the ag stream, which doesn't typically have as tight of a consular relationship as the SOP stream. So we're working on making sure that our relationships are strong enough with the consulate that we can have honest conversations if workers are in trouble. Other than that, we hear a little bit about transportation. It would be nice to have a bit more of a connection to the community. That's been really tough in COVID, but generally I think transportation is another issue that we need to address, hopefully as a province, but definitely in partnership with industry and communities. I think those are the main ones. And if I'm missing any, I would welcome the opportunity for anyone to jump in as well. But those are sort of, I think, the main ones. And those are not COVID specific. So those are sort of long-standing problems, I think, in terms of accommodations. We participated in I believe ESDC had put out a consultation around minimum standards for temporary foreign worker accommodations. There's a lot of work to be done there, and we know that. So yeah, I think in general, accommodations need to be better, and we know that. Our role as a ministry after COVID will be interesting, because prior to the pandemic, the ministry didn't have a direct handle in labor. So the government has a ministry of labor, and they would typically have sort of jurisdiction over all of those things. So it's been a real learning curve for us to be so heavily in the mix. And I hope that we get to continue that work, because then we can kind of take up the charge specifically for the agriculture workers. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thanks so much, Shannon, and thanks, Chris, for your question. Jorge also posted a question in the chat. Thank you to the province of BC for all of your work. My question is, what is covered by the inspections? Are these only focused on health or COVID, or do they extend to labor workplace protections as well?
So with the inspections, my understanding of this is that so the Ministry of Agriculture only does COVID related things. And that's because we have seconded powers from the Ministry of Health, because they don't have the capacity to do that right now, just with the pandemic being so all consuming. So my understanding of this is that there are about 9 different entities or organizations that have different pieces of inspections that they focus on. So one of the problems with the current inspection regime is that it's very fragmented, and it will result in several people going to a farm at multiple times. And it's frustrating for the farmer, because you could pass on, say, 7 of the 9 from 7 different agencies, but then fail on 2 others from different agencies. So the inspections process needs to be overhauled. So we're hoping that eventually we would be able to consolidate that into maybe 1 or 2 agencies having maybe seconded authorities from other agencies, or like a super inspector model, which is kind of the dream, because right now it's very cumbersome. I know that there was a federal government pilot that was led where they were trying to do a bit of a group approach. I don't really know what came of that. But so right now they're focused on health COVID, but generally they would focus on the traditional WorkSafe types of criteria. And I'm sorry, I don't know exactly what those are, and I don't want to speak for those folks, but I would imagine things like, building integrity, mold, electrical outlets, those types of things. Again, I can find out a little bit more about that as well, but it's just a little bit out of my lane.
Thank you so much, Shannon, for joining us today and for sharing and for giving this update. It was much appreciated.
Thank you very much for having me. Take care, everybody. Thank you.